Hi folks, this is Mary. I'm going to talk you through the curricular plan. You've got a copy of this, so we'll just have a look at it and talk through it, and hopefully that will give you some ideas about how to complete your own curricular planning. If you look at this one, this is a curricular area, so we've looked at mathematics, but we're looking at shape. Over here, you might want to do an interdisciplinary learning project. So if you're doing that, look at the focus, the theme that you're doing. So it might be winter, for example, or it might be about shape, or it might be about the outdoors, that kind of thing. But make sure that you put that in there. With an interdisciplinary plan, you will have more than one curricular area. So remember that and think about how you're going to organise that within the plan, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, down here you can see that we've got the class stage group. For example, you might put in the whole class if it's an interdisciplinary plan, but also it might be worthwhile thinking about your differentiation and how you're grouping the children, because even with a plan where it's whole class, you're still thinking about differentiation within that, and that's really important at this stage. So I've put it in here 3 groups in relation to maths and the shapes that they're doing. So even though they might be doing the same things at certain points, at other times they will be differentiated, and the expectation of what they're doing as well as the outcome will be quite evident. Now we come down to the Curriculum for Excellence outcome. You'll see here I've only put in the codes, but you do need to write the outcome code and the accompanying statement. So make sure you have that within your plan. The reason for that is to show that you really fully understand what the outcome is, and that is demonstrated through what you're teaching the pupils. Within this column, we've got key questions. One of the things that's probably useful when you're thinking about the questions is, are you using responsive planning? Are you asking the children first what are the questions that they have about the topic? So I've put some examples in here that children might come up with. For example, the properties of shape, the difference between 2 and 3D shape, but also the key questions might be for you as the teacher, as the person who is thinking about your assessment. What do you want the children to know and be able to answer at the end of this group of lessons in this plan? On this side, you'll see we've got the key skills: questioning, communication and making predictions. Again, they might be different depending on what you're doing. I've chosen 3 because particularly in this plan I want the children to think about what they're doing and to question, and also to work together. And we'll see that as we look at the plan. We'll see that the children are going to be working together and communicating, working collaboratively. So this is important that we have communication. So remember, when you're thinking about planning, you're not just thinking about the learning outcome in terms of what the children learn about the subject, but you're thinking about the skills that they're going to be using to enable them to engage with that subject. So communication skills, for example, might be important. In maths, we're making predictions, we're asking children to think about what's going to happen next, we're looking at patterns and these kind of things. So it's important that you think about that. You'll see here that in the key skills I've just got the 3: questioning, communication and predictions, but what I would want you to do, and what we'd be looking for, is for you to write in more detail about that. So what is the questioning about? How are you using questioning to enable the children to develop their thinking, their critical skills, that kind of thing? What kind of communication are you expecting? Are you looking for written communication? Are you looking for communication by children working together and collaborating? Are you looking for communication in terms of the ability of the child to be able to question? So these sorts of things. So put some detail into that. Don't just have, as I have, questioning, communicating and making predictions. Add to that and put a little bit more detail. And it should be clear when you look at your plan and when your tutor looks at your plan that these 3 skills are coming through within the plan. So we'll see how that's happening as we go through the plan. I'm not going to go through every lesson, but I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things, and then we'll look in more detail at 1 or 2 lessons. This box, it asks you for your curriculum area or your idea of focus with reference to the DTM plan and the lesson outline. For every lesson that you teach from your curricular plan, you'll be asked to have a lesson outline for that. It's not as detailed as the lesson plan, but it's an outline of your lesson. And it should be in as much detail as you need to deliver the lesson effectively. So you can see here what I've got is I've got my lesson outline here, and it's MSH01. Now that's a code that I've made up for that particular lesson outline. So it's mathematics, shape, and it's lesson 1. Basically, that's what that stands for. And then it was done on a Monday, and it was the first maths lesson on Monday. So in reference to my daily time management plan, it's Monday 1. So you can see I've made up this code. You code it in the way that's going to be useful for you, but also in a way that's useful for other people, and that they can see quite clearly and cross-reference quite clearly back to your lesson outline and back to your daily time management plan. And that's important, that we can see that cross-reference. So, as I say, code it in the way that's useful for you, but ensure that the cross-reference is really clear. Within the next box, and I don't want to say too much about these because you are very familiar with learning intentions, but think about the learning intention that you want the children to achieve through this lesson. You don't need to put in the success criteria because that's going to come through in your lesson outline, and also you'll think about that in relation to your assessment. So within this one, learning intentions, quite straightforward. Key learning experiences. This is important that you don't write a whole lesson plan. It's not about writing a lesson plan. It's about picking out what the learning experiences for the children are, and perhaps the kind of things that you want them to do. It's a good reminder for you to help them to be able to think about what they're going to do, and it also enables you to think about what you want them to do. You know, they're going to be using whiteboards. It helps you just to direct the learning. And you'll see down here in red that I've got differentiation. So how are we differentiating this? Think about that as well. It might be just differentiation through communication. It might be differentiation through tasks, but it might be differentiation through the grouping. So have a think about that, and you'll see here for this one, it's about think, pair, share. It gives children the chance to discuss their ideas. So in terms of that, that's how you're differentiating. It's not different tasks for all children, but what you have to be very clear about is if children are engaging in that kind of task, think, pair, share, how are you assessing that? Because it's not enough for you to sit and give children that task and say yes, they've all done think, pair, share, and they've shared their ideas. What you need to do is be listening and observing to find out what are the ideas. Can the children use the skills of communicating? Do they understand the concepts of 2D shape and 3D shape, for example? So you need to assess that. So let's go and look at the methods of assessment here. You can see I've split it into what, how, and the evidence for that. That's my own way of doing it. You might have a different way of doing that, but you can see the kind of things that I want to get out of this lesson, and then how I'm going to do that, and then what my evidence is. So you'll see I've got checklists to assess understanding of 2 and 3D shape. That goes back to this idea of think, pair, share. What am I doing when the children are engaged in that activity? I'm watching them and I've got my checklist, and that's how I'm assessing the children. And that might be a particular group, or it might be the whole group if I'm able to do that. Okay, so let's move on, because one of the important things about curricular planning is about the sequence of it. We're looking at sequence and progression. It's one of the ways that it helps us to assess your understanding of progression and learning from one lesson to another. So when you look at your completed curricular plan, you should see that you have some progression in the learning. You're moving from one lesson to another. And when you look at this plan, then look for that. Look for where's the progression in the learning and how are we building on the learning. Okay, so for example, you'll see here, revisit. So we're revisiting something. We're going back to prior learning. So think about that in terms of your progression. When we come further down, and as you'll see from the first 2 lessons, we just have differentiation through the classroom assistant and through children working in pairs and think, pair, share. When we come down to these lessons, then the differentiation is more evident in terms of the groups, and you can see I've colour coded it in relation to the groups. So if you're thinking about differentiation where groups are actually engaged in different learning and different activities, then it's worthwhile thinking about how you show that on your plan. So again, you might want to colour code it, you might want to think about it in terms of writing the group name. I've colour coded it because I feel it's easier for me, but do remember you're going to be printing these out to put in your folder, and if you do that, can you afford colour copying? So that's really important. It seems like a simple point, but it's important. So think about how you can do that best. So you can see here that there are, it's quite clear, the differentiation within the group. We come to our next lesson, and it's back to more of whole class probably working together, and it's about the children working on stations, and this almost in itself is giving them reinforcement of their learning, the previous learning that we've had. Also, I think what is important is that when we're assessing, and think about this in your planning as well, that you're not always assessing something different within every lesson. So if I go back to lesson 2 here, you can see that what I want is for the children to be using appropriate language. We're talking about vertices, edges, faces. We're using the appropriate language of maths. That's what I want to assess. And you can see when we come down to lesson 4, I think, yes, we're looking at the same thing, appropriate vocabulary. So we're not always looking to assess different things all of the time. Sometimes we're looking to assess the same thing, and we're working on different activities to enable the children to reinforce that and to consolidate that type of learning. Okay, moving on to the final lesson. Moving on to this final lesson, you can see again we've gone back to differentiation of groups, and the groups have quite significant different things to do. So again, think about that. Think about in your curricular planning a number of things. The progression. Can I see progression in the learning? Have I planned for progression in the learning? Where is the reinforcement? How am I differentiating and how am I showing that? Also, how am I going to assess that? What am I assessing? How am I assessing? What kind of evidence can I have to show my assessment? Because we don't always have hard evidence in the terms of jot or work. There are lots of other ways of evidencing it, but make sure you do evidence it. So folks, that is one plan for mathematics. If you are doing an IDL plan, just let's imagine that this mathematics is within the IDL that you're doing. You would probably want to put all of your mathematics together, and then following that, let's go to the bottom, let's go to my final lesson in maths. As I come to the bottom then, if it's language that's my IDL, then I'm going to put language underneath that, and so on for each area that links to my IDL topic. So it's one big curricular plan for IDL, and I hope that makes sense to you. What I want to say before I go, apart from good luck and you'll be great at curricular planning, is that this is, remember, a sample. It's an example of how you might plan. It's not a definitive, but what the important things are, if I can just go over them again, are that you link it very clearly to your lesson outline so that it's easy to cross-reference. You link it very clearly to your daily time management plan. You're very clear on the differentiation of your groups, and you're very clear about what, how, and the evidence for your assessment. Now, one last word, and I think this is really important, is we've got evidence for assessment. Okay, let's go back to lesson 3. We've got evidence. Checklists are my evidence for assessment. In my folder, I would want to have these checklists so that my tutor can look at that and can see how I've assessed. But also what's important is that you cross-reference that checklist back to your curricular plan. So make sure you've done that so that it's clear to your tutor and for you when you start to look back. It's clear that you are able to show how it cross-references. One more word of advice I would give is that a curricular plan, although we do it in advance, and this is what we plan, we might find that after the second lesson things have gone awry and the children just don't understand what they're doing, or they need much more reinforcement. If they need that, please use this and add in lessons that you're going to do in order to reinforce work or in order to challenge the children more. Please put that in. This is a working document, so use it as a working document. Okay folks, that's everything from me, and it was good to speak to you. Thank you for listening.